Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual PNR planning meeting. As usual, I will run through various points of housekeeping before we move to the agenda. Today's meeting is being held under the virtual meetings regulations using Microsoft Teams. All committee decisions will be as valid as decisions made at a physical meeting held in the town hall. Today's meeting is being streamed live on the internet, and a recorded version will be on the Council's website within 48 hours. As Chairman, I can confirm public written statements will be read out by Council officers. The Planning Committee consists of 13 members, adjusted to accord with political balance, agreed by all the group leaders and the Chief Executive. Please confirm you are leaving the meeting in regard to declared disclosable pecuniary interest. Compliance is essential to comply with the law. An officer will invite you back into the meeting following determination of the agenda item. Please use the chat function when proposing or seconding a motion. State clearly what you are moving. This will aid the general public following the planning process online. Voting on applications will be carried out by roll call. The legal officer will call out each councillor's name in alphabetical order. The vote will be taken on the basis that you have heard the entire debate on the application. Please state if your vote is for the motion or against the motion, or if you wish to abstain. This will ensure the vote is correctly recorded. Voting on matters of procedure, such as confirmation of the minutes, will be undertaken using the chat function. Please ensure all mobiles are switched off and your IT devices are muted when not speaking. Hazel, can you now please conduct the roll call for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bridger.
Present.
Councillor Bryant. Don't think he's joined us. Councillor Cherry.
Here. Present.
Councillor Cole is here. Councillor Crew.
Here.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
Present.
Councillor Harley.
Present.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Present.
Councillor McQuillan.
Present.
Councillor Payne.
Present.
Councillor Solomon.
Present.
Councillor Tucker.
Present.
Councillor Westwood.
Present.
For officers, we have Richard Kent, Simon Exley, Roger Wilmot, James Wigmore, Lee Bowring, Eleanor Fletcher, Sally Evans from the Police Directorate, and Sue Buck, Michelle Chesterman, Mike Riggle, and Hazel Brinton from Corporate Services. That's the roll call. Thank you, Chairman. Oh, apologies. We have no apologies or substitutions, but we do have two non-voting members with us, and that's Councillors Bird and Councillor Holland.
Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Hearn has just joined us as well, Chairman, as a non-voting member.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 1, addresses by members of the public to be read out by officers. And we have 6 addresses for today's meeting. The first address relates to agenda item 6, erection of 14 dwellings, land to the east of Youngwood Lane, Nailsea. Dr. Martin is against the proposal, and his statement will be read out by Michelle Chesterman.
Thank you, Chairman. I've lived for 42 years opposite the proposed development site and also write on behalf of my many neighbours. Council policies provide compelling reasons to refuse this application. Number 1, it seriously undermines the strategic gap between Nailsea and Backwell. This has been a long-standing policy which has been reaffirmed many times and has wide public support. We have the distressing situation that the case officer is reduced to presenting highly selective arguments to justify the incremental destruction of the council's own strategic gap. Number 2, it is naive to accept the applicant's argument that it is only a small part of the gap, given that the site layout shows an open hammerhead and one empty plot pointing down into the gap, surely in anticipation of further development. The owner of the present site has legally binding restrictions on the disposal of the next 3 fields. There is no doubt that if this application is approved, it will lead to many similar piecemeal applications in this area, which will then be difficult to refuse, as none of them, according to the case officer's claim, would cause overriding harm, but taken together would destroy the strategic gap. The way to protect the gap against incremental loss is to refuse this first violation. Number 3. The triangular area at the site entrance is part of the designated local green space protected by the site allocation SA5 and should have been included in the town green application. Number 4. The road layout is uniquely unsatisfactory in that the proposed exit forms a dog-legged crossroad at the Perrings with Walnut Close. Such arrangements have been scrupulously avoided along bus route feeder roads in Nailsea. No mention is made of the future effect of the new traffic from the 600 plus homes approved for the west of Nailsea. The shortest route to the station, Backwell and the A370 to Bristol will be down the Perrings, bringing a large increase in traffic. The creation of this crossroad should be refused. Number 5. The design involves a sharp bend immediately after the entrance leading to the pavementless shared space between 1.2 metre stone walls. This remains the position in the applicant's supporting transport documents. The Council's 2020 Highways Development Design Guide states that a shared space should be no longer than 100 metres. The proposed cul-de-sac is significantly longer than this. The Highways Officer has already written that such a road will not be adopted. These problems arise from overdevelopment of this narrow site, which means that it is not possible to provide safe, full-width pavements for families with pushchairs or for the mobility impaired. The Council needs to abide by its own policies and refuse this application. Statement ends, Chairman.
Thank you. The second address also relates to agenda item 6. Grassroots, the agent for the applicant, support the proposal, and a statement will be read out by Hazel Brinton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to have this statement read out today. This application is for 14 dwellings, including 4 affordable houses, and lies on the edge of Nailsea, which is a sustainable settlement for new homes. The site lies close to everyday facilities and public transport, including the railway station, and as part of this scheme, pedestrian access to it will be improved through the provision of a new surface footpath along the site frontage. We understand residents' concerns over the proposals. However, there is a need for housing, including affordable homes in Nailsea, and this proposal is not for mass development, but is relatively small scale and seeks to bring something extra to the town. Clifton Homes are a small local company which sets them aside from large PLC house builders, as they are committed to delivering smaller scale, high quality development. Central government has stressed the importance of supporting these builders as they help diversify the market and promote development which is more unique in design. This is the case with the proposals currently sat before you, which have sought to take cues from historic core of Nailsea, utilising stone, render and timber cladding. Dwellings have been designed to look like traditional cottage-type homes, which reflect the urban edge location and provide a transition out to the countryside. Boundary treatments have been carefully thought out, with residents having their own garden gates and low stone walls surrounding their properties. The scheme will be a sensitive addition to the settlement and raise the standards of design generally. Over the year that the application has been pending, Clifton Homes has made changes to the proposals to respond to public comments, including to the homes which will back onto the rear of numbers 23 to 31, the Perrings, by reducing the height of the dwellings, incorporating dormer windows and pulling them as far away from these properties as possible to avoid any perception of overlooking or overbearing. In addition, the proposals offer 3 bungalows, something which is rarely seen in modern development schemes. This will support existing residents of Nailsea that may be looking for somewhere to downsize or are less able to use stairs. The application is for detailed planning permission and could easily be built out within 5 years, therefore boosting housing supply and delivery. We therefore respectfully request that you agree with your officer's recommendation to approve the application and grant this very high quality development permission. End of statement, Chairman.
Thank you. The next address relates to agenda item 7. 60 dwellings, land off Moor Road, Yatton. Eric Sewell is against the proposal, and his statement will be read out by Michelle Chesterman.
Thank you, Chairman. After an unsuccessful pre-application, the Persimmon submitted application 16/P/0888F, which councillors refused in July 2019. Persimmon did not appeal. Their latest application, 19P3197FUL, is to build 60 dwellings on land that was for 7 years rugby training pitches rented by Yatton RFC. Valid reasons, I believe, for refusing this application are: a proposed development access road across the orchard will result in the removal of 340 metres squared, National England, of hedgerow currently used as a commuting feature by both species of horseshoe bat, is likely to harm a nationally rare fungus, and is less than 10 metres from Kenmore SSSI. If approved, would lead to 2 years of construction traffic through the orchard, affecting irreversible harm to this sensitive and delicate site. It would also harm the setting of a Grade 2 listed building, the Grange. Case law was made by case number CO/4552/2015 in March 2016, when a High Court of Justice judgment stated that damage to a heritage asset outweighed other factors, including the lack of a 5-year housing supply, and squashed the planning inspector's decision to approve it. It would compromise road safety by using the junction onto Kenmore Road, already unsafe. Moor Road is totally unsuitable for the increased traffic resulting from a 60-dwelling development. It would result in material harm to the open rural countryside character and appearance of a valued gateway into the village of Yatton. In 2019, North Somerset Council declared a climate emergency. The council should be ensuring the protection of sites like this, not appeasing developers to destroy them. New facts. An adjacent site has come forward. 2 linked planning applications are in preparation. 1 residential development on Yatton RFC, Strongvox, and another to relocate the club to beyond the Bridge Inn. If councillors are minded to accept housing on the allocated part of the site, surely Persimmon must be made to wait for alternative access onto the main road through the rugby club site, and not through the orchard and out onto a narrow unclassified road. No homes will be lost, just a delay in their construction. Councillors have a duty to protect delicate sites like this and should not cede authority to developers, but pursue what is right for the community and the environment. Please refuse this application. Statement ends, Chairman.
Thank you. The next address also relates to agenda item 7. The applicant for Persimmon Homes supports the proposal, and the statement will be read out by Hazel Brinton.
Thank you, Chairman. The officer report is commended, and this statement addresses specific matters raised during the application. The eastern parcel of this site is allocated for residential development within the North Somerset Site Allocation Plan. Therefore, the principle of residential development on this site has been accepted and therefore should not be under contention. In relation to the western parcel, the orchard land, the site allocation policy text states, an access road across the orchard will only be considered if alternative access arrangements cannot be made and subject to a suitable scheme being agreed with Natural England. Persimmon Homes have submitted detailed information which demonstrates that there is no suitable alternative access to the site. The alternative access arrangements have been comprehensively discussed as part of the previous and current application, and the position has remained unchanged. The officer's report comprehensively covers this issue and concludes that there are no other suitable alternatives. Furthermore, Natural England do not object to the development, subject to early delivery of the proposed mitigation, which is secured by the recommended planning condition. Given that no alternative access is available and Natural England do not object, this application is entirely in accordance with the allocation policy and NPPF paragraph 32. This revised application addresses the previous reason for refusal. The previous reason for refusal included unacceptable loss of trees and hedgerow, cramped layout, and impact on the rural character and appearance of the former orchard and setting of Yatton. This application shows the removal of trees and hedgerows necessary only to provide the access and visibility display. It also includes the reinstatement of the orchard with 21 additional fruit trees, a new hedgerow and tree planting along all field boundaries. This application has been reduced and is now exactly 60 units, which is in accordance with the site allocation policies. In relation to setting of landscape setting, the site is allocated and therefore the principles of impact on setting have been established through the plan making process. Furthermore, through the reinstatement of the orchard and tree and hedgerow planting, any impact is mitigated. Substantial concessions have been made by Persimmon Homes to deliver a scheme that is entirely in accordance with development plan policies. I can confirm that we will achieve the 15% betterment through delivery of fabric improvements and solar PV in accordance with policy. Therefore, in the context of North Somerset is not able to achieve a 5-year housing land supply and the application is entirely in accordance with the development plan, is delivering much needed housing, including 30% affordable on an allocated site, I commend the officer's recommendation to you and encourage members to approve this application without delay. End of statement, Chairman.
Thank you. The next address relates to agenda item 8, demolition of a bungalow and 2 detached dwellings at 234 Down Road, Porter's Head. Tina Mason is against the proposal and the statement will be read out by Michelle Chesterman.
Thank you, Chairman. I live at 236 Down Road and I object to the application. The planning reason for rejecting this application is that the submitted plans omit windows in my property and as such cannot demonstrate that the 45-degree rule has been met. This can be objectively proven and is a matter of fact, not opinion. The last time this came to committee, the planning officer stated that the planning rules had been met, that the development is deemed not to be overbearing and complies with the RDG1 test in terms of depth, width and height. The proposed development is overbearing. A balcony to the rear of my property, close to the boundary adjoining the new development, is omitted from the developer's plans. The plans do not therefore demonstrate how the 45-degree rule has been met in respect of this window. The balcony is clearly visible in the plans for 236 on the council website. I can and have previously provided photographs and diagrams, but am not permitted to within this as it has to be read out in the meeting. Despite my having referred to this balcony in previous objections, the developer has made no attempt to rectify this. Should you choose to reject this application on the basis of the inaccurate plans, it will be very easy to provide objective evidence to the planning inspectorate as to why this has been rejected. If these plans are approved, this would be the approval of a planning application that can be objectively proven to be inaccurate, despite the fact that this has been called out. Furthermore, as the date of writing this, I am not aware that any committee members have had an opportunity to view the site from the rear of my property, as no one has contacted me to gain access. This would allow the council members to see both the omitted balcony and the overbearing nature of the proposed property, which essentially encloses the side of 236. I understand the need for further housing development in the area and have no objection to 2 houses being built next to me, provided they are of a suitable size and scale. The need for further properties is not a reason to approve inaccurate plans, which do not reflect the impact on neighbouring properties. Thank you for listening. Statement ends, Chairman.
Thank you. The last address also relates to agenda item 8. Davis Architectural Services, the agent for the applicant, supports the proposal and the statement will be read out by Hazel Brinton.
Thank you, Chairman. The proposals at 234 Down Road provide 2 new dwellings on an existing site within the settlement boundary, which is strongly supported by planning policy at local and national levels, as well as across the political spectrum. The principle of developing a brownfield site for intensified residential use is reinforced by the core strategy, with central government refocusing on the importance of increasing densities in urban areas, as they are sustainable locations for housing. Placing development here is a key benefit of the scheme, as it provides residents in a location where they are able to walk, cycle or use public transport to access everyday facilities. Providing housing within the settlement boundary takes pressure off the need to develop greenfield sites, as well as boosting housing supply, which is particularly needed in North Somerset at the current time. We acknowledge local concerns raised, which were related to the street scene, parking, overlooking and overbearing. However, during the application, we have addressed these issues by making amendments to the proposals. This has included reducing the scale of the dwellings so that they match the building line of the neighbouring properties, removing the cycle bin store from the front, lowering the ridge height, replacing the original balconies with Juliet balconies, removing the raised decking to the rear, and amending the site access and parking. Whilst the proposals are very similar to the neighbouring site, which was granted permission by members in 2018, we believe that they represent an improvement over what was permitted at number 232, as the proposed design bridges the gap between the more historic properties found in Down Road and the newly implemented scheme on the adjacent land, as well as neighbouring properties that have undergone contemporary extensions in recent history. This would have been noticeable following the committee members' site visit. Since the adjacent application was granted permission, there have been no significant changes in planning policy that would warrant a different conclusion being reached. It would therefore be unreasonable to dismiss this application on the grounds of design, layout or character. Officers have also considered the potential impact from overbearing on the adjacent properties, including number 236 Down Road. Whilst concerns have been raised about loss of light into their kitchen, it has been concluded that the scheme is compliant with the residential design guide because it does not affect the primary source of light into this habitable room. The side windows also remain protected by the 45-degree vertical rule. We have worked positively with officers and have addressed public comments as far as possible, which has resulted in a scheme which responds to the local context more appropriately. We therefore respectfully request that members approve the proposals in line with your officer's recommendation. Statement ends, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 2 has been dealt with. Item 3, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests. Michelle, any comments?
No comments in chat, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 4, minutes of the 17th of March to approve as a correct record. Again, are there any comments?
No comments, Chairman.
So are there any members wishing to vote in? Are there any members voting against the motion?
Nothing again, Chairman.
Any members wishing to abstain?
Nothing.
In which case the minutes are approved. Thank you. Item 5, matters referred by Council, the Executive and other committees. There are none. Item 6, planning application 20/P/0861/FUL, 14 dwellings at Youngwood Lane, Nailsea. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. If we can move on to the first slide, I'll run through an explanation of the proposal briefly and then pass on to the update sheet. So firstly, the site is outlined in red on this plan. It's to the south of the pairings at Nailsea, and to the left-hand side of the screen, bordering the site itself, you'll see Youngwood Lane as that leaves the pairings and runs down southwards, in this case obviously towards the bottom of the page. It's behind a group of 5 dwellings that front onto the pairings, which again you can see on at the top of the red lined area. If we can go to the next plan, please. Okay, so this one gives the site in a little bit more context. So you'll remember from preceding committees over the last few months that we've dealt with applications at the uplands, which is sort of further off to the west, and Youngwood Lane, itself, which was the site that was allowed on appeal and was slightly larger, or rather larger, than the allocated site. The application site that we're considering this afternoon is, as you'll see where the cursor is, that's the main block of the site, and it also extends into a small triangle immediately to below the pairings, pretty much where the is in the pairings written on here. We'll be able to show that in a moment or two on the next slide, please. So the site is to the south of the existing dwellings on the pairings, so it sits immediately below those, and as you'll see from cross sections later, it does sit on somewhat lower levels of ground. The triangular area that I referred to is the at the entrance to the site, and the immediate sort of mouth of the access, and the immediate few meters of that pass through an area which is shown as proposed public open space in the site allocations plan. The proposal is for a cul-de-sac, which again, as you'll see, passes to the west, right to left on this plan, and the areas immediately either side of the access mouth are proposed as open space, and then down to the bottom left-hand corner of the site, there's another area of proposed open space associated with the scheme there. To the left-hand boundary, the western boundary, and the southern boundary, which is at the bottom of the site, there are 5-metre margins shown there, which are to act as dark bat corridors, and that will be pertinent as far as the habitats regulations assessment is concerned on this particular site. Existing TPO trees are shown there, largely the larger ones shown on this plan, and they are proposed to be retained, and we are satisfied with the space that is left for those trees. Next slide, please. Okay, so the street scene at the top of the page is an indication of the northern side of the access road and what will be seen from within that road. So these are the dwellings that are immediately to the south of the existing dwellings on the pairings. The two blocks to the right are a group of bungalows which are shown there. So those are the ones nearest to the pairings. The ground does drop slightly as one enters the site, and as you'll see, the houses are designed generally to be in a fairly sort of cottage-like form. So I think we felt satisfied that these weren't standard house-type designs, and creates really quite a distinctive development. The street scene to the bottom is the one, again, if one were standing in the cul-de-sac and looking southwards at the proposed elevations. Thank you, Richard. Next slide. Just an indication here of the fact that the site falls away from the pairings. So you'll see at the right-hand side of these sections the existing dwellings, and the first site section shows the bungalows, or the approximate level of the bungalows as one enters the site, with the access road between the two sort of white shown cross-sectional details of dwellings there, and that depicts the two-storey properties which are on the south side of the access road. On the lower of the two site sections, again, I think you probably get a little bit more impression there of the way that the land falls away from the pairings as well. And from that point of view, we were satisfied in terms of the distances between new dwellings and the existing ones, and the relationships in terms of any potential risks of loss of privacy or overbearing effect. And from what is shown here, we were quite satisfied over those relationships. I think that was probably the last slide, so I'll just pass on to the update sheet and just sort of run quickly through that. So there's been some additional information from the applicant concerning access for refuse lorries. I think that's a technical detail where that information probably just needs to be finally verified, but we are satisfied with the additional information on existing and proposed levels that we've received. There's also some more detailed information concerning the one of the house types and matters concerning the visibility display and the pedestrian cycle path blended crossing. Just to explain that, this is where effectively the footway is given a priority, so vehicles effectively, or drivers of vehicles, realise that they're crossing a footway, and that will form a function in the longer run as we seek to implement proposals with the funding received from Youngwood Lane to link to the railway station via the pairings. We've reported 16 additional letters of objection and summarised the principal additional planning points there, which relate to the strategic gap, views over to Backwell and the local green space designation. And we've given an explanation as to why in this particular circumstance, and it is very much on its own particular merits, and that would apply to any potential future applications in the vicinity, why in this particular case we felt that the proposal was not doing demonstrable harm, in fact, in terms of the strategic gap, or indeed the loss of part of the local green space designation from the site allocations plan, because in both instances, in terms of those policies, we are talking about very small sort of areas that are affected by this proposal. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hearn.
Thank you very much. I'll apologise in advance. I've had builders turn up this afternoon and there's drilling going on. So hopefully I can get this done before they start again. I've called this application in today for the following reasons. Nailsea Town Council and residents local to the site feel that the land falls within the strategic gap of Nailsea and Backwell, and also falls outside the settlement boundary and does not fit with the adopted core strategy. Backwell is viewable from the rear gardens of the existing bungalows. That was a point that was sort of made in part of the application, that it wasn't viewable. It is. I've seen it for myself. The land is classified as agricultural land in the planning application and is still being used as such. It's not being designated as building land. There were sheep grazing on it on Monday, so it's definitely agricultural. The entrance exit to the site, we've had a little bit of an update today. I'm still personally not happy with the tracking of those vehicles, because what that doesn't show is the fact that if you exit the site to the left, you're going uphill and very quickly it's a brow with a drop away. So you haven't actually got much traffic. Because the exit to the site also is uphill itself, with the pavement, you've got to be quite a little way back. So if you're turning left to go to the station, you could be in the sight of oncoming traffic. The road junction on the opposite side of the road, Walnut Close, already has several near misses a week. So that everybody's sort of being a little bit wary on that score. I've great concern about one particular oak tree on the site that has a TPO. There's nothing in the paperwork that has actually said they can do it or not, but there was a request that they actually lifted the crown by 3 meters. The one particular oak tree is the biggest one on the top of the plan that's being shown here on the left hand side. Underneath it is what's referred to as a quarried area. It's quite a dip, and the branches of those trees actually go down into the dip, and it looks, from the view on Monday, it looked as though that tree was actually being supported by that. So I'm concerned as to what would happen with that tree if it got lifted, or what was allowed. And I think that sort of the land that the actual entrance exit of the site is on is, according to maps, as has been mentioned, it was originally designated, and on the original application of the sites of the bungalows and the houses opposite, as public open space. The council, I'm not sure which one, has been mowing that land for the last 40 odd years. So we've been incurring costs and been dealing with it as it's ours, sort of with the residents' land, shall we say, open land. So I know there is a document out there that says the family bought it, but I think that was after they'd had the previous planning application refused. So there are issues regarding that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger, do you want to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just briefly, I think we have acknowledged within the update sheet that Backwell is visible in the distance as sort of filtered views. That's probably, it becomes a little easier during the summer months. But I think the point that during the winter months, I think we've made the point that we felt in terms of the strategic gap, and I can illustrate that if necessary, that this is a very small part indeed of the strategic gap, and it is located behind an existing built frontage onto the pairings, and hence on the merits of this particular case, and this particular case only is all we can sort of speak of at this point, we felt that wasn't going to be a simple case of being able to demonstrate harm in that respect. Yes, you're correct that the land is currently being grazed. We've seen that for ourselves. And in terms of the open space, yes, I think some of the land is being used as open space, but this particular section that would be utilised in order to derive access from the pairings is semi-enclosed to the extent that there is some existing vegetation around parts of it. It's a relatively narrow part of the overall proposed open space in the site allocations plan. I think as far as the oak tree is concerned, I probably just need to check that with the case officer, but there is an arboricultural report which is submitted with the application, and any development won't, in a sense, alter the fact there is a TPO on there, and we would expect clear proposals to ensure that that tree is not harmed in that respect. But it may well be possible to carry out any necessary sort of trimming in order to ensure a satisfactory relationship with the new plots. Yes, you're right, the ground does drop away. It does give the impression that there's probably an old quarry there. So yes, we were aware of that. I think in terms of the highway comments, I mean, I can ask James Wigmore, our Highways and Transport Officer, to comment, but my understanding is that there has been no objection in principle. We are aware, obviously, of the other schemes that have been approved that may use the pairings, and we're aware of the sort of gradients on the roads. And I don't believe that there's been any issue as far as the additional volume of traffic on this road individually or with those other sites. But perhaps James might wish to comment on detail concerning the access point.
James.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Yeah, so a road safety audit has been carried out by the applicant, and it's been looked at by a highway safety engineer. And the blended crossing plans have also been looked at, although they only came in quite recently. So we're satisfied with the tracking and the blended crossing. The only remaining detail to be agreed is just how the footways on the pairings join into the footway that we want within the site. So we're not satisfied that it's a shared surface, and we have requested this footway, which is shown on the plan, but we want that to have a proper curb and not just be designated with a different kind of paving. So that's the outstanding matter that I understand could be addressed with the condition, just how the footway on the pairings matches into that in a level fashion.
Thank you. For me, the key issue is assessing impact on the strategic gap. Looking at this application in isolation, it's fair to say that detrimental impact on the gap would be minimal. However, the open hammerhead into free fields does open the door for further substantial development in the future, which would substantially be detrimental to the gap. Interested to hear other members' views. Michelle.
Yes, Chairman, there's a request to speak from Councillor Bird and Councillor Cherry.
Councillor Bird.
Yes, just a quick one, really, backing up what's been said already. I mean, I do wonder where our housing strategy is going here, because this site is not in the adopted core statutory. It's outside the Nailsea settlement boundary, and it's in a strategic gap. The open space to the southwest, as we just said, has a road going into it, and so the intent is obvious there for further development. So yeah, I would ask people to vote this down, please. Thank you.
Councillor Cherry.
Sorry about that. Yes, I inspected the area, and when I went to look at it, it was extraordinary. You can see definitely straight across to Backwell, and I don't understand why anybody would just go ahead and just get rid of a bit of a strategic gap, because effectively, you know, it's there for a purpose. And also the other thing which did concern me was the exit, and because it's actually opposite that other little road, and what I did feel that would be quite a dangerous exit. And with regards to the trees, yes, they're literally on top of the site, and perhaps, you know, it did really look like a quarry, that area, and it just all seems very, very squashed together. And so, although it is a good design in some senses, there are some aspects of the scheme that aren't that good. But overall, I think the main criticism is the strategic gap. Thank you.
Michelle.
And Councillor Westwood, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chairman. It is a good quality development, though, isn't it? The houses that are being proposed are the kind of things that we should be approving, in my view. I agree as far as the strategic gap is concerned that we need to come to a judgment on this, and I suspect that this is, given that there are only 13 of us and we are not local, or most of us aren't actually on top of this development, as it were. I think it's beholden on us to go along and have a look to see whether we, as a committee, think that it is a significant diminution of the strategic gap. If you want me to, I'll propose. If you want me to, I'll propose a site meeting.
Okay. So, do we have a seconder for a site inspection? That's been seconded.
Chairman, Roger Wilmot's asked to speak.
Okay. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Just sort of perhaps hopefully be able to clarify a couple of the sort of points that have been raised. I think in terms of the settlement policy, policy CS31 allows us effectively to consider up to 50 dwellings adjacent to the settlement boundary. So that is a point I think that needs to be borne in mind. In terms of the land supply at the present moment, we are able to demonstrate 4.2 years rather than the 5 years that we should be able to demonstrate. And I think we also have to bear in mind that not only do we need to be able to show a conflict with the adopted policies, but we do need to be able to demonstrate harm arising from that. So I think if it's possible, I might just go to the one of the plans later on, which just illustrates the point about the scale of the incursions into the proposed open space and the strategic gap. I think just briefly in terms of one other point which you might wish to consider, James Wigmore has clarified that the access road would not be acceptable for further developments because of its width, and the footway would not be wide enough for intensification of use. But ultimately, I mean, we would have to judge any further applications in the vicinity on their own individual merits. But possibly, if I could briefly just go to that last plan on the slides, Richard, just so I can just demonstrate where the scale of the incursion is. Thank you. So just on this plan, you'll see if Richard can perhaps demonstrate the outline of where the site is. The area that's got the checked hatching in it, the darker green hatching, that is the full extent of the proposed open space. So that is where the cursor is showing at the moment. That is the level of incursion into what is a much larger area of proposed open space. In terms of the strategic gap, all of the area which is hatched in the lighter green there forms the strategic gap, and in fact that goes on for some distance beyond this down to I think sort of Backwell Lake, and it goes significantly further south as well. So what we're talking about is quite a small incursion into that area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just to remind members now, we are debating site inspection. Michelle.
Richard Kent has asked to speak, Chairman, and also Councillor Solomon.
Well, bring in Councillor Solomon first.
Yes, speaking to the site visit. We're doing this more and more. We have an option to go and look at the site independently, and I know myself along with other councillors will do that. And what this does, it delays it for another cycle. It's more time for the officers that they have to spend. And I do think that we need to be very careful when we ask for site visits, the cost that they incur, and it's the sort of thing we should have done beforehand, I feel.
Richard.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, Councillor Solomon had said some of what I was going to say, which is that we do ask councillors to go and look at sites in advance, as some councillors have done with this instance, and it does help keep the wheels turning, because we are expected to make timely and decisions. The point I'd just also like just to reinforce what Roger Wilmot said, which is that the policy, the core strategy policy, does allow for development of this scale on the edge of the settlement, and the gap does not necessarily overrule developments. As you'll see in the report, we've set out the criteria which need to be assessed, and we have assessed the application against those criteria, which is why we're saying it doesn't have an overriding impact on the gap. And then you have to play in as well the 5-year supply shortfall, which Roger referred to. That means that you have to show that the adverse impacts of the development are so significant they outweigh the benefits of providing the additional housing. So that does weigh in the balance in terms of in favour of the development. So it's really important just to take all that on board, please.
Michelle.
Councillor Westwood, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Yeah, if you'll allow me, I'll just come back on the points that Councillor Solomon and Richard have raised there regarding site meetings. I always go on site meetings when I'm asked to, and if I'm asked to go beforehand, I do. In this case, I don't think anybody asked us to go and have a look at it. My view is, given the situation that the P&R committee is in at present, and the consultations that we're making about the future size of it and future shape, I think that we are, as a 13, and as I've said, not most of us not on top of this particular site. I think it's behoven on us to let the local residents know that we have looked at the situation very closely in person, as far as the full point, which seems to be the size and location of the strategic gap, and whether it can be, in this case, chiseled away at around the edge. Anyway, there you go. I'm still proposing a site meeting.
Michelle.
And Councillor Crew and Councillor Cherry, Chairman.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have a problem with this development, but I have to say that, and I've seen it, but we do need to recognise, especially after last night's debate at Council, and as Councillor Westwood has said, we do need to listen to local members. If the local members feel that a site visit would benefit decision, then we shouldn't really argue. It's difficult at the moment, site visit, because you do really, if you're going to get any proper understanding, you do need officers' input at a site visit. And we understand that's difficult at the moment, but it will get better as we come out of this, have proper site visits. But although, personally, I'm happy with the development, I've seen the development, when local members ask the question, when we talk about local democracy, as we did last night, then we should adhere to their request.
I think the main worry is housing beyond this development. Anyway, Councillor Cherry.
Yes, I would also support a site visit, because I appreciate what the officers are saying, but because the strategic gap is so important to NAILC councillors, they are very concerned about this, and as should all of us be, because it is a significant thing. I do think that a site visit in these circumstances is important, and also people can check the road layout and all the rest of it, but I think the strategic gap is the key point. Thank you.
Yeah. Michelle.
No further comments in chat, Chairman.
Okay, Roger, any final comments?
No, thank you, Chairman. I think I've said what I need to.
Councillor Westwood, do you want to sum up, or have you summed up?
You're muted. I think I summed up.
No, just May I just raise a point? This is, as has already been said, a good quality application, but Roger Wilmot has tried to assure us that any fears of further development on 3 other fields in the same ownership as the applicant is not going to be possible. And I'd just like him to assure me that that is in actual fact the way he sees it, and there is no way that the hammerhead there could be opened up for further vehicles and further access to the other 3 fields,
I think
or
Roger
even one
said,
of them.
I think Roger said every application on its merits. So,
but I mean, I appreciate that we can't be looking ahead and guessing at how things might turn out. But if there could be any change to that area of that application that would stop further vehicles going beyond it, then I would like to hear someone comment on that possibility.
Roger, do you want to make a final comment on that point?
Well, part of the proposal involves public open space being proposed at part or adjacent to the southern part of the hammerhead, which would provide a restriction. I've explained the advice that I have from James Wigmore, our highway officer, is that the access road would not be acceptable for further developments because of its width and the limited footway along there, which wouldn't support any significant intensification of use. So I think that's probably about as far as I can really explain that at the moment. I mean, I think if a significantly wider road were to be proposed, then I would think it would be it's likely it would affect the layout, in which case we might well be in the position of saying that's going to have to be a fresh application, but I can't really predict that without anything in front of me.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Chairman, Richard Kent has asked to speak as well.
Richard.
Sorry, Tim, just to follow up on that, we have to be really careful about suggesting that this application should be refused, because it may lead to something else in the future. You can't take that approach in reality. There's no evidence that there will be development to the south as a result of this application. You do have to consider it in its own merits. We do have a new local plan which we're starting to work up, and it may be through that local plan process that you may want to consider further allocations around Sutton Ailsie. But if not, the local plan as it stands on its own merits. You need to consider this application as it stands.
So we have a proposal for a site inspection. Sue, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll now take the votes in alphabetical order, and for each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming, excuse me, that they have heard the whole of the debate, unless they state otherwise. The proposal is for a site visit. Councillor Bridger.
Visited, but yes.
Councillor Bryant.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Cherry.
Yes.
Councillor Cole.
4.
Councillor Crewe.
Yes.
Councillor Crockford Hawley.
Against.
Councillor Harley.
4.
Sorry, was that 4, Councillor Harley?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor McQuillan.
4.
Councillor Payne.
Against.
Councillor Solomon.
Against.
Councillor Tucker.
4.
Councillor Westwood.
4.
That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
9-4.
Right, moving on to application 19/P/3197/FUL. 60 dwellings with supporting infrastructure access with Moor Road, land off Moor Road, Yatton. Roger.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Again, I'll run through the presentation first and then come to the update sheet. So not a great number of slides, but if you can see, the site is outlined in red on this plan. To the right-hand side of the plan, it's not terribly clear on this one, I'm afraid, but you have Kenmore Road, and then branching off slightly to the left, there's the curve of Moor Road, which proceeds through to Horsecastle, but it does not join on to Horsecastle any longer. It's now closed off, therefore forms a cul-de-sac. The proposed access is shown off Moor Road, close to its junction with Kenmore Road, and you'll see it sweeps through what's currently a remnant orchard that was formerly associated with the Grange, which was a cider making farm. That orchard is the one which has a handful of remnant trees in there, which are sort of dead or dying, and one or possibly two of those, I think, is home to what we understand to be a nationally rare fungus, and which captured a good deal of attention on the earlier application which we processed on this particular site. So the access road proceeds through and then beyond the boundary line of the former orchard progresses into land that was formerly used by the rugby club for youth training facilities, but which is a site allocated for residential development. To the right-hand boundary, running from the top of the page, i.e. it's running from northwest to southeast, that forms a boundary with the Stowy Reen, and beyond the site to the northwest will be the existing rugby club main ground, and that's a point which may be a subject of some discussion during the later part of this debate. So if we can move on to the next plan, please. So this is a sort of hybrid of plan and sort of visualization of the scheme as it would be if implemented. And just to try and explain, you'll see that at the bottom right-hand corner, the access into the orchard. This is the route which has been proposed by the applicant to access the development site, and in the light of the visibility requirements we're told are necessary there, that does require visibility displays which involve removal of some of the existing mixed hedge line, which is a mix of native hedge and trees, which is considered by Natural England to be of significance in terms of the commuting and foraging of bats who use the Stowy Reen as one of their particular flight paths, and there is evidence, yep, thank you, that's the Stowy Reen along that boundary. And then just to the bottom of the plan, you'll just see the Grange, which is the listed building, and where there are some outbuildings where there are some bat roosts present within that. Now this plan shows proposals to effectively regenerate the orchard area with a number of new fruit trees. It's not terribly visible, but to the right-hand side of the access road, adjacent to the Stowy Reen, there is a proposal for an attenuation pond as part of general open space. The orchard is intended really to function separately and would be fenced off, effectively to give priority for biodiversity objectives. There are a couple of footpath links which you'll see shown in the sort of sandy sort of colour, which link from the residential element of the scheme through to the access road and to the open space. And between the loop of that path and the proposed residential site, there is a proposed play area. To the northwest of the site, i.e. the top left corner of the site, you will see the existing main rugby club ground, and you'll see there's a small hard court area just to the south of that, which I think are used for some local games as well. Just off the site is the or off the plan is the pavilion and clubhouse for the Yatton Rugby Club. The proposal also shows a margin around the top left adjacent to the rugby club and down through the Stowe Reen, a new hedge line to be proposed. The Stowe Reen boundary along there is currently fairly sparse, and it's proposed to establish a new hedge along there, and to also establish replacement hedging alongside the access point onto Moor Road. Can we go to the next slide, please? This again is the planting plan. There's probably not an enormous amount to add to what I've just explained, but just to say that the cross hatching shown on the former orchard area also shows that to be planted with Emmersgate seed mix as well, which is regarded, I think, widely by ecologists as being a favourable greensward sort of mix, effectively to encourage biodiversity. And again, you'll see evidence of the proposed orchard planting on there, and perhaps slightly more clearly the attenuation pond is visible. The brown margins are the back corridors that I referred to a moment or two ago. If we can go to the next slide. Just 4 street scenes here. So the top one, just to give an indication, is the main view from the orchard. So there is proposed boundary treatment along there to sort of minimise, I think, the prominence of those dwellings to the orchard. The gap you'll see on the right shows where the access road passes through, and just to slightly to the left, one in from the sort of the left-hand most dwelling shows the footpath link through into towards the play area. The second street scene is an indication of the street scene on the right-hand side of the access road going into the site. The third one down is for the one of the cul-de-sac that progress slightly off towards the west on the access loop, and finally the one at the bottom is effectively the top of the row of dwellings right at the top of the site, adjacent to the rugby club boundary. I think that's all of the slides. So I'll just progress on to the update sheet. Essentially, we've confirmed some further comments from the applicant in respect of the ecological proposals. They wanted to make the point that the orchard's currently in private ownership, used for grazing horses, but that they regard this as potentially an enhancement in the long term, with the option that can be passed to the parish council to manage for biodiversity objectives. The replacement planting, as you'll see from the report, we have taken due note of Natural England's very specific requirements for advanced planting in this respect, to try and ensure as far as possible continuity of the hedge lines and minimisation of interruptions for the bats that frequent this field and the Stowe Reen. So we sought to slightly strengthen conditions 5 and 11 in that respect. So they're represented on the update sheet. There are a couple of other ones where we've taken due note of advice from our solicitor as well. And then we've reported 4 additional third-party comments, one of which is particularly a matter that is of particular concern to one resident who lives opposite the site. The other one returns again to the issue about whether there are realistic opportunities to provide an alternative and preferable access to the development land part of the site. I think that really comprises the update. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bridger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, where to start? Actually, I'll start by saying it feels like again we've got an application, a full application actually in this case, coming to committee with some matters still outstanding. In this particular case, it's the 5th time this has come to committee. My predecessor, the late Jill Isles, brought it twice. It was deferred a couple of times until after the last election. Jill wanted to protect the orchard from development. Councillor Griggs stood in for me a couple of years ago when this committee refused the previous application. And I know some members visited the site at that time, a couple of times, I think, either side of the election. I've listened to the applicant's statement, but will move for refusal, and with your permission, Mr. Chairman, take a few minutes to address some issues and to give my reasons. But first, just wanted to ask for a seconder, please.
I'll second you, Steve.
Thank you, Richard. So, Chair, just to begin with some context, most, if not all, members will be aware of the development that's taken place at the north end of Yatton. Bull Homes have just about built out 260 odd homes, 60 apartment extra care facility. A new school was finished in January to accept new pupils in September. All of that was very much developer led, and as Peter, particularly Councillor Crew, will know, a steering group was set up initially under his chairmanship back in the day, and I'm sure he'll agree with me that actually officers have done a pretty good job effectively of retrofitting a master plan on that site. Next month, the first residents move into the Curo development. It's a further 154 homes. Thankfully, that includes 46 that are genuinely affordable, most for social rent. Opposite the rugby club, the principle of development's been granted for the Oxford Instruments site. They've given notice that they'll be moving out of the village next summer. I've currently got 2 other active applications in the village, one for 34 dwellings, another for 100. And 2 further applications will be submitted in the next month or 2, one at either end of the village, one for 39 dwellings, and another for 60, which will possibly deliver a new medical centre that we desperately need. None of those sites are currently allocated, and they split opinion in the village, but I can assure the committee I'm not going to be bringing all those applications to committee. I have to bring residents with me, and it's difficult, frankly, because in Yatton people's confidence in the planning system is shot. But that's my job. I'm trying to think strategically, and I don't call in applications willy-nilly. This is the first one actually I've called in a couple of years. So with all of that going on, Mr. Chairman, it focuses the collective mind, I think, on what the community really considers what it wants to protect. which brings me to this site, this Moor Road site. There is zero support for this application, zero support. It's probably one of the two most sensitive and biodiverse sites in Yatton. There's a Grade 2 listed farmhouse supporting a bat roost, a remnant grazed orchard, a rare fungus. The site borders the Stowe Ream, which is itself important. The one corner of this site is literally meters from a nature reserve and a triple SI. It's not just a question of supporting the bat roost; it's the habitat that supports the roost, which is important. So, I think to most of us in the village, 2 years of construction traffic going through that orchard, and it's literally there's only a handful of remnant grazed orchards left in the district, would significantly harm it as a valuable habitat. The proposed access road across the orchard would result in the removal of over 300 square metres of hedgerow. And I say hedgerow, I do note officers say hedge, it's hedgerow. I think the vocabulary that we use is actually quite important, and that hedgerow, there's a canopy of trees as well, and that's a commuting corridor for both species of horseshoe bat. So the applicant supplied a shadow habitat regulation assessment, but as the local planning authority, we have a duty to review the evidence with our own assessment. We haven't done that. We have a duty beyond reasonable doubt that there won't be significant negative impacts, and I don't think we can do that. As Mr. Sewell alluded to in his address at the top of the meeting, Strongbox will be submitting an application in late May or early June to build probably about 80 houses on the rugby club next door. So Persimmon are completely wrong to say nothing has changed since 2 years ago. Unless the design that comes forward is absolutely awful, I'm probably not going to be calling that in. Okay, it's inside the settlement boundary. This is outside the settlement boundary, and access will be onto the main road. Natural England's position on this application is I think the material determining factor. I've spoken to Natural England 3 times since October. They're of the view that Persimmon can build their houses, but they should have to wait until the allocated field can be accessed through the rugby club next door, allowing all the infrastructure to be concentrated to the north of the site, where frankly all the development in the village is taking place anyway. That would be straightforward. It makes sense strategically. That's what's in my head. And more so, you get permeability then between sites. What we're proposing here is another isolated development. I know officers wanted to be clear on Natural England's position, and I can tell you they object. Okay, they submitted an objection on the 18th of January. It was unequivocal. Their letter was never put into the public domain after I requested it to go up onto the planning portal. So having offered a bouquet to officers earlier, here comes the brickbat, I'm afraid. They spent 2.5 months putting enormous pressure on Natural England to get them to water down their objection. The revised comment came in a couple of weeks ago, and this has come straight to committee. It's not a good look. It's not a good look, officers. Following the recent decision of council to declare a nation emergency, thank you, Councillor Payne, for bringing that to council. We should be ensuring the protection of sites like this. It's incredibly important. I'm coming to the end, Chair. I wanted to briefly mention the proposed access out onto the single track bit of Moor Road, where the hedgerow will be ripped up. The junction with Kenmore Road, where this meets the unclassified highway across the moors. The speed limit there actually changes from 30 to 60, not 30 to 40, as it states in the report. And members may or may not know that road across the moors is part of the proposed Quiet Lanes project, which obviously received a lot of attention in recent weeks. The road safety audit supplied by the applicant a couple of years ago is frankly the lamest document I've ever encountered since being a councillor. It talks about 20 vehicles an hour going down that road. As part of the preparation work for Quiet Lanes, Highways conducted some traffic volume surveys back in 2018. 3,061 vehicles a day going down that road. Last June, they did a further survey looking at where that traffic was going and recorded it in the peak hour, 8 till 9 in the morning, 409 vehicles, not 20, 409. Chair, there are many reasons to refuse the application as submitted. I think that the critical one is, the alternative access. I'll need to be guided, I think, by Richard on how that might be articulated in terms of being contrary to policy, perhaps the community of effect, which is now, I think, enshrined in CS32. But I think, as 2 years ago, I think the application as submitted would result in material harm to the open rural countryside character and appearance of what is a valued gateway into the village. That's contrary to policy CS5 of the core strategy. Additionally, the proposed access road would result in the unacceptable loss of trees and hedgerow and harm biodiversity, contrary to policy CS4 and development management policies 9 and 10 of the Sites and Policies Plan Part 1. And I think our biodiversity and trees supplementary planning document would also, inform this and give some material guidance. So I've got 1 or 2 brief points to make when I sum up, Chair, but I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for listening.
Roger, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, just sort of, I think it's clearly evident from the report that we've stated that this is an allocated site, and I know there's been concern about what's been sort of referenced, I think, by some third parties as rushing this through, but we've been discussing this site since 2016 through the 2 applications that we've received. Between the first one and this current one coming to committee, we've spent quite a lot of time trying to establish whether there are indeed alternative accesses. The rugby club has been one which has been oft mentioned, and that is one where, as officers and indeed members, we've engaged in discussions with the rugby club, their partner developer, and Persimmon over that. I think that the issue in part is also about physically there might be the prospect of an access. However, in terms of availability and deliverability, I think that is a particular issue. There is no current application on the rugby club site. It's not an allocated site. In itself, it has, it's going to require ecological surveys to demonstrate that there isn't any harm arising from that. And I think we know that Sport England will raise issues concerning that until or unless it's demonstrated that there is an equivalent replacement pitch or pitches actually available. Our understanding is that the partner developer with the rugby club would be submitting a parallel application for effectively a new ground and facilities further up North End, just beyond the edge of the village. That in itself is likely to encounter the similar sort of issues on which we're going to need to be satisfied. And in terms of what our advice is from Sport England, unless we're looking at really quite expensive hybrid surfaces, we're talking realistically of probably 2 growing seasons before any replacement pitches could actually be available on that site. We've also looked at the other probably obvious one, which is Grange Farm Close, where there is currently a stub end on the sort of access road which leads through into a small parking area which abuts the site. We've approached the current owners of that, which happen to be Taylor Wimpey. We understand that in principle they were happy to engage in commercial discussions on that. I think Persimmon have raised the point that that current road is not an adopted highway, and it's been quite some years, in fact, since it was developed. So I think their view was it's unlikely to be. Sorry, I momentarily lost connection there. So their view was that it's unlikely to become an adopted surface in the future, and that gives a particular problem, adding a further 60 dwellings potentially accessing off that, notwithstanding the potential for objections from residents in that particular close. So we do have to bear in mind that in terms of allocating sites, we have to sort of, I think, bear in mind the deliverability and availability of those sites. I'll just briefly return to the point about Natural England's comments. Yes, it is the case that we received an objection from Natural England in January of this year. Frankly, as officers, we were very, very surprised indeed by that objection. I can't recall another case where a consultee has effectively changed their position markedly in that respect. So we felt obliged, I think, to make further inquiries of that, given that on the previous application on this site, they had signed off a habitats regulations assessment and accepted that the development could proceed. So we were in a position where effectively a significant consultee in this respect appeared to have changed position. And we felt it was essential to be able to provide you with proper guidance, that we asked relevant questions of that consultee as to what had changed in the intervening period that prompted them to come to a different conclusion on the application. I think as a result of asking those questions, they have reached probably a slightly more, I think, a more nuanced view. I think they're not saying that they like the application, and I wouldn't suggest to you that they do. I'm very well aware that the officer concerned would prefer this development not to go across the orchard. But I think in response to those questions, I think they have had to accept to a large degree that there are there is little new information that is available that effectively would give, I think, support to a different recommendation from them on this application, and hence the reason why we have now reached a recommendation of approval on it. I hope that sort of explains why we asked those questions.
Okay, Michelle.
There's been requests to speak, Chairman, from Councillor Solomon, Crew, McQuillan and Cherry.
Councillor Solomon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, deja vu, because I sat on the application when I first came onto the council. And first off, I'm not going to call for a site visit because we did visit. I can remember our site visit. And what was apparent was the access onto the road. It was very, very difficult for that amount of traffic. It was definitely a concern, and I felt it was a concern. Now, I would like to see these houses built, and I've looked at the objections, and it seems to me it all revolves around a compromise, and that compromise would be through two developers working together. Now, whether it's profit, I don't know. They don't want to. So we know the rugby club hasn't been put forward yet, but believe me, within 6 months to a year, it will be. And they will build their road. And we'll be back, if we grant this one, with allowing this developer to build through the orchard, when if they worked with the other developer in the future, they could use that access road. So rather than turn it down, is there any way we can defer this for 6 months for the developers to get together again and come up with a better conclusion as far as the access? Otherwise, I would be minded to turn this down. Thank you.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this is a saga that goes on and on. I know officers have said quite clearly you have to look each one in its merit. But I can go back to 2017, 2018 with the Yatton working group, which involved the parish council. And at that time, it all hinged on what happened at the rugby club. Originally, there was thoughts that they wanted to build on the orchard. We said, no, that wasn't a goer. They then came up with this plan, which we have now. And then we then said in 2018, well, the discussions with the rugby club that was going on meant that they would move, and their plans would be that 6 months' time, the application would be considered. Now, we're now 2 or 3 years on from that, and still nothing's happened. So they came back and said, well, what about a temporary access road in order that the site could be started? Now, the discussion we had at that time was to say, yes, you could have a temporary road across to get the development started, but that was on the understanding that the development next door wasn't far away, and the access when the site was finished would be through what is currently the rugby club. It was never meant to be a permanent access through the orchard. And that's where we were, go back 3 or 4 years ago, and the last discussion we had with as Roger Wilmot will know, the last discussion we had on the Yatton working group with the parish council. So we moved on, and we keep saying, yes, it depends on what happens next door. I know we have to look at it in its own right, quite rightly, and in its own right, without considering the rugby club, in its own right, it should be refused. Thank you.
Councillor Cherry.
Thank you very much. Robert Payne very efficiently raised a motion which the whole council supported on the preservation of biodiversity. And in this case, the scale of the attacks on the biodiversity, the rare fungus, the hedgerow, and we know that hedgerow is very, you can't replicate it. Mitigation, all the later steps, it cannot be replicated. It cannot be imitated or brought back properly. And also the horseshoe bats. I mean, and then on top of it, the actual danger in terms of the road access. And also I read somewhere about flooding. I was also concerned about flooding. And this is another thing that there's so many reasons why this application has got massive problems. I really think we should just turn it down. Thank you.
Michelle.
Councillor McQuillan and Councillor Westwood, Chairman.
Councillor McQuillan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief, for some of the points I was going to raise have been raised by others. Fundamentally, the council did unanimously declare a nature emergency. We decided as a council across parties we would make biodiversity and nature a priority. We have a development here where we know objectively, I believe, from third parties that there will be harm to biodiversity, and we also have a clear way of building the houses without doing that harm. So I think the decision in front of us is pretty simple: to turn it down as it is currently formulated and to ask the developer to reconsider.
Thank you. Councillor Westwood.
Yeah, very much all our yesterdays, as has been mentioned. I shan't be asking for a site meeting on this one because we had one 2 years ago. It was a kind of I don't know, an illuminating moment, shall we say. The previous chairman of the council, Councillor Shopland, recounted how, as a young boy back in the 1930s, he used to come in along the road across the moor, sitting on the back of a cart, a horse and cart, and the view that he remembered was still essentially the same. Right now, the ephemeral nature of the view across at the village, the on the outskirts of the village to the farmhouse, which has been there for at least 250 years, is essentially the same. Okay, it's an ephemeral reason to not alter it, as it were, but it's a massive reason in many ways. If we can, we're not objecting to them building the houses, as has been said. We're not objecting to the houses. What we're objecting to is them turning the remnant orchard with its fungus, with its roosts for bats, and its hedgerows into some kind of they propose that it could be a green space under the tutelage of the parish council. Bit of a cheek that, if I may say so, to be honest. And have a few children's toys there to brighten things up a bit, but change it essentially from, and then basically getting rid of hedgerows is the killer as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we've been told that Taylor Wimpey are willing to negotiate. They're not saying nope, go away. Persimmon should, in my view, be told to wait and see what happens, as Councillor Solomon has said, 6 months down the line. So yes, I'm quite happy to second Councillor Bridges' proposal on this one.
Thank you. Michelle?
No more comments in chat, Chairman.
Okay. Roger, any final comments?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd just sort of like to pick up briefly the matters of the views, and I appreciate that there is, I think, a very appealing view as one enters the village. I think we fully understand the sort of gateway issue. I think you have to be aware, however, that the site is an allocated one, and the part which is proposed for development, which broadly speaking, I think a lot of people have said, and that includes objectors, that they don't object to the housing allocation. That is going to be for a number of years. That is going to be very, very visible, in fact, from Kenmore Road. So I think the issue over the development, whether it be accessed from the rugby club or not, I think that we should be wary of saying that it's going to adversely impact on views on the allocated part of the site. That will become visible for a number of years until the proposed mitigation of hedge planting along there begins to take effect. I think as far as the orchard is concerned, what is proposed is to try and regenerate the orchard. I mean, the tree fungus is not an issue which has been particularly majored on by Natural England on this occasion, although at the early part of the previous application that was the largest focus of attention, but that seems to have receded into the distance somewhat, and Natural England has not offered any particular measures or suggestions as to how to protect that tree fungus. I mean, I have had sort of preliminary conversation which suggests that another orchard owner might be prepared to actually accept spores from that. So there may be ways of dealing with that, but in essence, that doesn't appear to be a significant issue which Natural England have put forward on this occasion. We've sought, given that the allocation of the site, what we've sought to do is to balance what we have considered to be the availability and deliverability of the site with trying to maximise the mitigation that we can provide on it, and hence we've gone and taken Natural England's recommendation on this and sought advanced planting, which would be secured through a combination of the conditions that we've recommended and probably measures through Section 106 agreement to try and give that a head start and the best possible care to establish replacement hedge planting and tree planting around the periphery of the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, Richard Kent has asked to speak, and also Councillor Harley has asked to speak.
Councillor Harley first, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Really, I only want clarification, if I may. I can remember when we were addressing the sites and allocation plan quite a few months, well, maybe a couple of years now, and one came up in my ward that I was not happy with and didn't know anything about it. And I was reassured at that time, even if it was on the sites and allocation plan, we still had the right to object to it. So I'm really saying this, I'm highlighting it because I can remember it very well, because that's the only opportunity we as councillors have, because we don't always have the sight of what's been put on that allocation form or allocation plan. So I would just like to say that, and I can quite understand. I missed some of the debate, I'm afraid, but I actually would not be supporting it.
Richard.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, just to pick up Councillor Harley's point there, the local plan allocation does allocate a site for housing, but it doesn't mean that the planning application has to be automatically approved, because you need to look at the details that come forward with the application, the types of houses, the design, the effect on neighbours, and all these sorts of things. So, but the allocation does broadly establish a principle of housing, and in this particular instance, the principle was subject to the access, and it did make clear in the site allocations plan policy that access shouldn't be across the orchard unless there was no alternative. And as Roger Wilmot has explained, that has been gone through in some detail. The other point I just want to make was just to clarify before we go to the vote what the suggested reasons for refusal might be. And I think from what Councillor Bridges said, it was the first point was that he wasn't satisfied that there isn't an alternative access, and that's contrary to the relevant site allocations plan policy. Then the second element was broadly, as per the previous application that was refused, which is the reason for refusal is in the papers on page 2 of this particular report. And I think it was all about the loss of the trees and the hedgerow, the impact on the semi-rural location, and the gateway to the village, or the setting of the village. I think, if I'm right, that's broadly what was being said, coupled with the impact on the ecology that's been described. I hope that's broadly right. And my final point is just to remind councillors that this is a section 1 item. So if the vote went contrary to the officer recommendation, then the application is held over to a subsequent meeting for decision, and that may also give the time for further discussion with the applicant to see what their next steps might be, and if there's anything more they can do to help you with your concern.
Councillor Bridger, do you wish to sum up?
Yes, quickly, please, Chair. Thanks very much indeed. If this is refused, Richard, I'd be happy to sit down with you, or virtually speaking, I've got the reasons, I've got them written down. Yeah, I didn't ask for a site visit. I'm aware that at least half a dozen of those in the meeting visited the site a couple of years ago. Anne is absolutely right, in my view, about allocations. Once they're there, it's very difficult to row back on those from that point. I wanted to make a quick point about the land supply position. Both Persimmon and the officer report talk about the fact, well, obviously we can't demonstrate 5 years. We have a made neighbourhood plan in Yatton. We only need to demonstrate 3 years. Okay, simple. That's a red herring. So the presumption of development is not triggered. Refusal of the application as submitted would not knock a hole in the numbers. I think many of us have said that. No homes would be lost, or maybe one home to make way for an access through the rugby club. It's probably, to be honest, more like 3 or 4 years. Can we not give the community 3 or 4 years, some breathing space, please? I can assure everyone that Strongbox will submit an application in the next month or two. I speak to them regularly. We met, Roger facilitated the meeting with Persimmon and Strongbox with myself and Councillor Griggs in September. At that time, Strongbox were open to discussion. Persimmon weren't, for obvious reasons. It's a very controversial site. The bar needs to be very, very high, in my view. I'm sure houses will be built on the allocated field, but churning up a historic remnant orchard and a hedgerow without reason would be, well, it's environmental. It would be environmental vandalism. Okay, I'm sorry to get quite pejorative about it. We can all contribute to making something work here, I think, in the interest of the community and obviously Persimmon and our housing supply. That is our job. That is our job on this committee to do that. So in the words of the parish council, just to finish, that the long-term future of the village cannot be compromised for the short-term benefit of the developer. That's what we're talking about. Thank you again, and I move for refusal.
Thank you. So,
Chairman, Councillor Westwood has just put up his hand to speak.
well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. All I was going to say was just in response to what Roger had said about the fact that the developments will be visible until the trees grow up about them. Well, yeah, they will.
Chairman,
Councillor Westwood. Yes, correct. We've summed up.
This is incorrect.
Okay.
Yes,
I
agree.
agree. I'll go. You should have told me to shut up. I would. Okay. Bye.
So we have a proposal to refuse the application. Sue, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll now take the vote from each councillor, and for each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming they've heard the whole of the debate. I did take a note that Councillor Harley said she didn't hear the whole of the debate. The motion by Councillor Bridger is for refusal. Councillor Bridger.
You're muted.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Bryant.
Approve.
Against refusal, is that Councillor Bryant? Or for refusal?
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Cherry?
For refusal.
Councillor Cole?
For.
Councillor Crewe?
For.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley?
For.
Councillor Harley, can I confirm that you did not hear the whole of the debate?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Councillor Leigh Morgan?
Muted.
You're muted, John.
Pardon. For.
Thank you, Councillor Leigh Morgan. Councillor McQuillan?
For.
Councillor Payne?
For.
Councillor Solomon?
For.
Councillor Tucker? Has
I have
left.
to say I did. No.
Sorry. I had a note that you left earlier. Sorry about that.
No, I was just going to explain. Actually, I'm afraid I did miss part of the debate when I had to go and pick up. There was a message coming through on my voicemail, and I had to listen to part of that. So I'm in the same situation as Anne. Really, I ought to not vote.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. And Councillor Westwood?
For refusal.
That's carried unanimously, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Agenda
So, Chairman, just for the benefit of any members of the public who are watching, as I explained earlier, because of the council procedure, that means this application is held
Comes
over
back.
to a future meeting.
Yep. Agenda item 8. Demolition of a bungalow demolition of a bungalow, erection of 2 new houses at 234 Down Road, Portishead. The application number is 20/P/2447/FUL. Eleanor.
Thank you, Chairman. So the proposed site is sited to the northwest of Down Road in the upper part of Portishead, in a densely developed urban area. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the layout is well proportioned with adequate outdoor space to service a dwellings of those sizes. The layout is very similar to the site to the right, which we approved in 2018. The proposal has been assessed against the neighbour impact test and is found to comply. With regards to the 45-degree test, I just wanted to note that there's 2 parts to the 45-degree test. So there's there's 2 parts. So in terms of depth, width, and height, and to be unacceptable, it has to fail both parts. And the neighbour was concerned about the rear bedroom balcony. So we can see, because it's on the upper floor and it's set in from the boundary, it would comply. So it would comply with the 45. Next slide, please. So the layout of the dwellings is well designed with adequate space and natural light to the habitable spaces. Next slide, please. So the proposed dwellings retain a traditional shape and incorporate design features characteristic of the area whilst contributing a more modern design to the street scene. Next slide, please. The proposed section drawing shows how the dwellings would sit in relation to the ground levels. Next slide, please. So this drawing shows the proposed and existing street scene. So the height scale and proportions of the proposed dwellings would be in keeping with the adjoining sites. Next slide, please. So this photograph is the front of the site from, well, that's the front of the existing dwelling. Next slide, please. So this is the view from the highway. Next slide, please. So this is the relationship between the existing site and 232A to the right of the site. Next slide, please. So these are the two dwellings on the subdivided plot to the right of the site that we approved in 2018. Next slide, please. So this is the view of the street to the left of the site. Next slide, please. So this is the relationship between the existing site and the neighbour at number 236. Next slide, please. So this is from the front of 236 looking towards the site. So overall, we'd recommend approval for the reasons set out in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Eleanor. Now, as the report states, we have a need to protect the living conditions of the neighbours, and as such, this proposal should be refused, as it will impact severely upon the neighbouring property at 236 Down Road. And I do want to point out the fact that in the Residential Design Guide 1, it does actually say the design should remain sympathetic to the appearance of the original building and should take into consideration the character of the area. I'll come to that later. Now, to the northeast, properties at 232 and 232A were the result of the application 18/P/3072/FUL. That was actually recommended for refusal and was brought to committee by then Councillor Baker. I don't know how many of you are actually aware of this. The existing bungalow, it said, measures 2.2 metres at the eaves and 4.4 in height, while the proposed dwelling would be 4.8 metres at the eaves and 6.5 metres in height, which results in a significant increase in height of 2.6 metres at the eaves. This was from the properties at 232 and 232A. That was the sudden change in height. It was more than double the height of the existing eaves. And I don't know why, but the agent for this property, this planning application, seems to be under the impression that I'm objecting to there being two properties on this application. And it isn't the proposal for two properties that we're necessarily objecting to. It's the size of the proposed properties and the overbearing impact they will have on 236 and on the surrounding neighbourhood. Now, aside from the fact that the site location plan on the website is wrong, as the original 232 Down Road is on the plan rather than the two new properties, the rear dormer windows, which include the balconies on 236, are not mentioned. This gives a misleading impression that there is nothing to have an impact on. Now, Ms. Mason had more to say on that in her statement that was read out earlier. So I wish to address certain other comments on the report. Now, the proposed design of the dwelling offers more contemporary style which would be in keeping with the adjoining site at 232. And in no way are these properties in keeping with any other house on this stretch of road, on this road, in fact. I ask you to consider how the applicant refers to the other plots, ones which used to house one property and have now been developed and now contain two, as evidence of precedence. Now, if one would look at the properties referred to, then, as well as noticing that they are actually along a completely different stretch of a very long road, you will see that they are actually very similar to their surrounding properties and are sympathetic to their environment. None of them stand out in quite the same way as 232 and 232A down road, which keep being referred to as the precedent. Now, in the report it states, the proposal incorporates design features of existing dwellings in the road with a hip-style roof and gable-shaped windows on the front elevations. So proposed height would not exceed the ridge height of the adjoining dwellings at number 232 or tower above number 236. Now, whilst this is true about the overall ridge height of the buildings listed above, the neighbouring property at 236 and the majority of the properties along here have roofs pitched from the ground floor with eaves much lower than the proposed townhouses, which adds to their overbearing nature and a complete lack of harmony with the street scene. So please note the letter from Tetlow King, which amongst other things states the objections are focused on the more subjective issues, such as overbearing or sensitive enclosure, which cannot be resolved with a 45-degree line. And please look at the photographs. Thank you, Eleanor, for putting these photographs up. Could you possibly, Eleanor, put up the photograph that shows the houses to the other side? Can you please understand how claustrophobic and intrusive this proposal will be? If you see from those photographs, the photograph before, actually, Eleanor, would be best. Richard, sorry, you've got them up, haven't you? That photograph, you can see, and I do hope that you've all been on a site visit. I noticed nobody replied to my email asking if you had been or not. So please, would you consider, would you be happy to have this next to you if all the rest of the houses upon your road look like this? Thank you.
Thank you. Eleanor, do you wish to comment again?
I was just going to say there have been a lot of additions in the street scene. So there are a lot more modern additions to the dwelling. So you can see this starting to evolve. So there are more traditional shapes, but they are using more sort of modern materials and introducing that. And also the development. So they do have quite a large rear garden at 236. So it is. So they've got an uninterrupted rear garden, which would allow light to their decking and rear windows.
Thank you. Michelle.
Councillor Solomon, Chairman.
Councillor Solomon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I apologise to my colleague, Councillor Holland, but I think it's subjective from a design point of view, and I quite like the designs, and I have done a site visit along with Councillor John Leigh Morgan. I don't think we checked the next door neighbour because there were no cars there and it was a rainy day, etc. So we looked at the new build of the two houses. We measured the plot from outside, and the front elevation was exactly the same. I think it would be very difficult now if we decided to turn these down in view of the two adjacent buildings that have already been built and passed, whether they were refused the first time or not. They did go through panel. And there is no doubt in my mind that the developer or the landowner would win on appeal. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't think we can justifiably turn these houses down. Thank you.
Michelle.
Councillor Westwood, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Thanks, Chairman. I went on a site visit. I didn't speak to the neighbour or knock on the door because I didn't think it was appropriate. So I don't think that knocking on people's doors who've got an interest in applications is a good idea. There you go. But I did go and have a very good look. I went around the back to Seaview Road and looked at the site from all angles. I spoke to a chap in Seaview Road who probably wondered what I was doing, but he'd lived there for all his life, he said, and he was in it, I think he probably was in his 60s, if not 70s. And he pointed out that when he was a child, there were very few buildings there, very few bungalows or houses or whatever. And over the years, a variety of development has occurred. And to be absolutely frank, I think that I agree with Councillor Solomon that we would have a devil's own job if this went to appeal, if we turned it down.
Michelle.
And Councillor Crewe, Chairman.
Councillor Crewe.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I visited this site the first time round when the other ones were done, which couldn't understand why they were marked for refusal in the first place. I can see nothing wrong with this development at all. It seems to me that it's quite a good one, and I think it should be approved with no problem.
Do you wish to make a proposal, Councillor Crewe?
Yeah, I move approval.
So do we have a seconder?
Yes.
Yeah, second.
Okay. Michelle.
Councillor Cherry's asked to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Cherry.
I just wanted to ask Eleanor a quick question. With the just for clarification, so with the residential design guide and the 45-degree angle, and these, I noticed that the lady who's posing is very concerned about the 45-degree angle. Can you explain a bit about what you said about it has to fail in two ways? Can you just repeat what you said on that point?
Yes, sorry.
Thank
there's
you.
two parts to the 45-degree test. So there's in terms of height. So you draw a 45-degree line on the neighbouring window, and then draw a 45-degree line into height. And then you also do one in depth width, which they've shown some on the site plan. So it's on the site plan, and they draw a line from their window at a 45-degree angle. And to be considered unacceptable, the Residential Design Guide Section 1 says it has to fail both parts of that test. Because this property is detached and the windows are set in from the boundary and the proposed dwellings are set in from the boundary, we can see that it would pass on the height, and then they have put the lines on in with depth width, the nearest ones as well.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Michelle.
No more comments in chat, Chairman.
Eleanor, any final comments?
Yeah, I just agree with Councillor Solomon about the subdivided plot to the right of the site. It would be, if that sort of does undermine us saying this would now be out of character. Thank you.
Councillor Crewe, do you wish to sum up?
No, Chairman, once again, I think it's been well covered, and I think it's one that I can understand neighbours being concerned, but in the end, it's not that bad a development. I think it's quite good. Thank
you. So we have a proposal to approve the application. Sue, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. I will now take the vote from each councillor, and they will confirm that they have heard the whole of the debate. The motion is for approval, as per the officer's report. Is that correct, Councillor Crewe?
That's right.
Thank you. Councillor Bridger.
For.
Councillor Bryant. I'll try and come back. I didn't hear Councillor Bryant. Councillor Cherry.
For.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Crewe.
For.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
For.
Councillor Harley.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
For.
Councillor McQuillan.
For.
Councillor Payne.
For.
Councillor Solomon.
For.
Councillor Tucker.
4.
Councillor Westwood.
4.
Could I just try Councillor Bryant again? Is he still in the meeting?
I don't think it'll make much difference.
No, thank you. It's carried unanimously, even without Councillor Bryant, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 9, planning appeals. Richard.
Chairman, nothing to add to the report. We have had a couple of appeals that good appeal decisions which came in after the papers were printed, but they'll be in your reports for the next meeting. The other thing I would say is you'll see there's a number of enforcement appeals, and that is adding quite a lot of pressure to the team. And I know that came up at council last night, but the team is under pressure with in a variety of ways. But these appeals are adding to that. We're putting up a good fight. The only other one I would just mention briefly again is the airport appeal. That is full steam ahead. We're working hard with the consultant team, getting draft evidence together. We do have to work with the airport on a more detailed statement of common ground, and we also have to work on with them agreeing heads of terms for a draft Section 106 agreement, which has to go in case that the appeal is allowed, and also draft conditions. That's all part of the process, and it doesn't mean that we're weakening our position. It's just the rules require all that to happen. So there is dialogue going on, and we'll keep you in touch as things move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, any comments?
No comments, Chairman.
Item 10, urgent business. Okay, members will no doubt be aware that this is my final meeting as chairman of PNR. It's a shame it could not have been in the town hall. Councillor Tonkin takes over the helm from next month, and I wish him all the best. And finally, a big thank you to Richard and his team.
Thank you, Andy.
That concludes the meeting.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank